Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Weaver. Welcome to the Audio Analyst. Pardon me. Today, I want to take you back to May of 1986 and explore a work that forever announced the inevitable and complete breakthrough event of an artist who had, to that point, defined the term cult artist. Peter Gabriel's fifth solo album, So. As you may recall from episode 18, as much as I enjoyed Gabriel's work with Genesis, I had never assumed him to be considerably more than a performance artist, readily exemplified by the fox head and red dress costume he wore during the Foxtrot tour in the fall of 1972. But given his growing disillusionment, he chose to leave Genesis in May of 1975, once the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour closed. After leaving the band, he indulged in what he labeled a short learning period, during which he took piano and music lessons. Apparently, I was not alone in finding shortcomings with his earlier work. But it wasn't long before he started working with Bob Ezrin in Toronto and London throughout 1976 and 77, preparing for his debut album, 1977's Peter Gabriel. Now, Gabriel fans will know that his first four solo albums were all untitled, featuring designs by Hypnosis, and were all simply labeled Peter Gabriel using the same typeface. Now, Gabriel has stated that his idea was to replicate the look of a high-quality magazine, one that would only be published on the order of once a year or so. Now, by his own admission, Peter has always worked slowly. Given his leisurely, deliberate process and pace, he felt it more fiscally responsible to build his own studio rather than to rent gear or studio time. So, in mid-July of 1978, along with his first wife, Jill, he moved into a Gothic Revival country home, Ashcombe House, in Swainswick, northeast of Bath, in Somerset County, in southwest England, where he converted its standing old cow barn into his studio. Now, each of those four solo albums has been nicknamed by the fans based on the stylish Hypnosis covers and are known respectively as Car, Scratch, Melt, and Security. Car features his first hit, Salisbury Hill, an actual hill located very near Ashcombe House. 1978's Scratch takes a bit darker tone, working with his wife and producer Robert Fripp in the Netherlands. But it was 1979's Melt that he considers his breakthrough, as he developed and pursued an interest in African music and drum machines. Recording the drums for the track Intruder, which featured Phil Collins, Peter had Collins play various rhythms without using any cymbals for extended periods, something now seen as a rather unique sonic signature of those original solo albums. But Melt has been credited as the first record to use gated reverb on a drum kit, a process that created a distinct sound, and one that Collins would use to create his hit In the Air Tonight from his 1981 Face Value album. However, when Atlantic Records, Gabriel's U.S. distributor, which had released his first two solo albums, heard the completed recording containing the songs Biko and Games Without Frontiers, they were convinced that it was much too esoteric, and they refused to release it flat out. So, after signing a new deal with Mercury Records, when it was released in May of 1980, Melt actually rose to number 1 in the UK for 3 weeks and peaked at number 22 here in the US. With the fourth album, Security, Peter took greater responsibility for the production than ever before. Recorded exclusively on digital tape over 1981 and 1982, he adopted the use of a Fairlight computer musical instrument. Introduced in 1979, the Fairlight CMI was a digital synthesizer, a sampler, and a digital audio workstation that allowed him to incorporate electronic instrumentation and sample world percussion, giving him the ability to use the exact percussion groove he wanted, rather than depending on what a session drummer thought would be appropriate. Security, released in September of '82, made its way to number 6 in the UK and to number 28 in the US. Its second single, Shock the Monkey, became Peter's first top 40 hit in the US, reaching number 29 on the charts. Interestingly enough, to handle its American distribution, Gabriel had signed with Geffen Records, who, without telling him, had titled the album Security to differentiate it from the last three. But the 1982 Security tour lasted nearly a year, and it became his first tour to turn a profit. Now, he followed up Security with an album of live performances called Plays in 1983. His next project was working on a soundtrack for Alan Parker's contemplative film Birdie, which he finished in March of 1985. The Birdie soundtrack had introduced him to renowned Canadian record producer, guitarist, vocalist, and songwriter Daniel Lanois. Now, Danny was known for his work with artists like Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Emmylou Harris, Willie Nelson, Brandon Flowers, and even Brian Eno. And working with Danny, Peter set out with renewed purpose, shifting his musical focus from rhythm and texture, which had been highly consistent throughout the first four solo works, towards more straightforward storytelling with his songs. Now, Danny has recounted that this new work, what would become So, took the entire next year, almost to the day. Think about that, a year to make a record. Now, while that may seem like an extraordinarily long time, I mean, it certainly does to me, Peter claimed that it may have been the fastest he had ever produced an album to that time. At the time of release, while many critics were quick to suggest that this was Gabriel's most commercial and accessible and least experimental album, a work laden with pop songs, I'd remind you that its incorporation of art and progressive pop throughout, in many ways, exposed its familial resemblance to his previous body of work. With its basis in art rock, here he introduced an increased focus on melody, successfully combining the elements of soul, R&B, and African music. The material here is significantly influenced by traditional world music, particularly the music of Africa and Brazil, incorporating rhythms and drum beats from those regions. Yet, he didn't just add on African drums or Indian violin to ordinary songs. These new musical components denote the musical foundation. Here, he combines the Fairlight synthesizer with a charming dash of world music. And Danny Lanois, his collaborative production work here adds layer upon layer of texture, replete with sublimely ambient detail, infusing its immaculate production with an inescapable sense of warmth, giving each note room to breathe, reveling in its own textures to the point of being lavish without ever becoming sterile, as could be quite common with productions from this era. Side 1, track 1 gives us the powerful Red Rain, offering a crash opening from the start. Here, drummer Jerry Marotta worked through the drum track over 8 takes, each one completely different and full of idiosyncratic details. The final drum track was mixed together from those 8 takes, often with selections being made bar by bar. And despite his disliking metal percussion instruments, Danny persuaded Peter to allow the extraordinary Stuart Copeland, the Police's drummer, whose distinctive sound and uniqueness are completely undisputed, to lay down a cymbal and hi-hat track. Now, hear Peter's voice singing in his uppermost register with a throaty, gravelly texture. Describes a destructive world rife with enormous social problems. The concept originated with a dream he had in which he visualized the parting of a vast Red Sea with human-like glass bottles filling up with blood. And though it's not explicitly stated, it's difficult to not make the blood association listening to this song. Side 1, track 2 gives us Sledgehammer, which was actually the last track of the original 8 to be conceived and recorded. The story goes that most of the band had actually packed away their equipment and were heading out when Peter asked them all to hang back and to quickly run through a song that he really wanted to explore and work out. Now, partially inspired by the music of Otis Redding, here Peter sought out Wayne Jackson, who he had seen on tour with Otis Redding in the 1960s, to record horns for the track. Wayne's contributions here clearly helped to lean the track more toward the soul side of the range than to pop. The opening shakuhachi bamboo flute, with a beat dominated by brass instruments, particularly Jackson's trumpet, features lyrics abundant with sensual euphemisms. Manu Katché, a straight session drummer, was invited in and asked to play off Tony Levin's bass groove and to interpret the drum track using his own style, his own swing, and his own sense of motion. And after his first take, Manu refused to do any further takes, insisting that he believed that any subsequent version would be inferior to his original interpretation. Then there was the MTV video to this song. You have to remember this video was way ahead of its time. All done old school with no CGI, all in camera, frame by frame, by Aardman Animation. It took 2 weeks of steady shooting to complete and cost a small fortune. But Peter felt that it really helped to capture the charm and the humor of the song. It's fascinating. I've included a link in the description file. Side 1, track 3 gives us So's most political statement, Don't Give Up, a duet with the enchanting Kate Bush. Now, Peter wrote this track with country diva Dolly Parton in mind, but she expressed no interest in the project when approached. But here, serving as the song's respondent, Kate assumes a comforting role with delicate vocals, so understated, so intimate, so pointed, they almost drip with emotion, providing the perfect counterpoint to Peter's voice, which allowed him here to demonstrate his exceptional falsetto. Fueled by his discontent with rising unemployment during Margaret Thatcher's premiership, he set out to create something as haunting as Dorothea Lange's American Depression photograph, Migrant Mother. It originally began with a rhythmic pattern of slow, specifically low-pitched tom-toms that Peter had tuned, and that Danny believed could serve as the focal point of the song. Bassist Tony Levin mimicked the drums with his bass line to create an exceptionally harmonious sound that is simply spellbinding. And during the second half of the track, Tony inserted a disposable diaper under his strings to dampen the sound and to compound the mood. Side 1, track 4 is That Voice Again. Closing out side 1, here Peter explores the concept of conscience. He was examining the parental voice in our heads that either helps or defeats us. Now, this track was co-written with guitarist David Rhodes, who plays over Katché and Levin's foundational bass and drum work. It has been surmised that the song was written after and heavily influenced by Peter's initial discussions with director Martin Scorsese about scoring his film, The Last Temptation of Christ. Now, before I go on to side 2, I think it important to note that the original LP release featured 8 songs, opening with Red Rain on side 1 and closing with We Do What We're Told, Milgram's 37 on side 2. But when they were preparing the CD release, though they left side 1 alone, they rearranged side 2, moving what had been the first cut to last and adding a last-minute collaboration made with Laurie Anderson. This is the picture, Excellent Birds, next to last. What a stunning move. You'll see what I mean as we explore side 2. Side 2, track 1, now opened with the amazing Mercy Street. Peter had become interested in the late American poet Anna Sexton's work after reading her work and dedicated this track to her, calling it Mercy Street after one of her poems, 45 Mercy Street. It grew out of a Foro-inspired experimental percussion composition that Peter had initially recorded in Rio de Janeiro. But when they played the tape back in the studio, it accidentally got played back 10% slower than the original speed, giving the drums a weighty, grainy quality that they all agreed highlighted cymbals and guitars. And it features Peter doing a vocal harmony with himself, with one shadowy and an octave below his main vocal. The resultant mix affords a sensual, dreamlike quality. Now, capturing that shadow voice required that Peter start very early in the morning because as his day progressed, that quality was lost and could not be reproduced. Side 2, track 2 is Big Time, that marries funk influences over a percussive bass sound with lyrics satirizing the yuppie culture so prevalent in the 1980s. Taking a skewed look at materialism and consumerism, this seems to be a result of Peter's self-examination, after which he considered whether he may have decided he wanted to be famous after all. Side 2, track 3 is We Do What We're Told, Milgram's 37. Though originally recorded for inclusion on Melt, this track has been described as an interlude. It references the experiment on obedience carried out by American social psychologist Stanley Milgram, and seems intended as a reference to the obedience citizens show to dictators during times of war. Murata's drum work here vaguely resembles a heartbeat heard from the womb, and is coupled with L. Shanker's violin and 2 overdubbed guitar tracks by David Rhodes. Side 2, track 4 is This Is the Picture, Excellent Birds, which Gabriel decided to include only 48 hours before the master tape submission deadline to the label. As a collaboration with American performance artist and musician Laurie Anderson, it was built and interpolated on a recording called This Is the Picture, on which Nile Rodgers plays rhythm guitar. And prior to the song's inclusion on So, Anderson and Gabriel performed it during a 1984 global satellite television broadcast and recorded it as a video for MTV. Now, side 2 closes with track 5, the astounding In Your Eyes, which has often been described as Peter's greatest love song. Inspired by the Sagrada Familia and its architect, Antonio Gaudí, Gabriel sings over a drum beat of only feeling complete in the eyes of his lover. Again, Manu was asked to play what he wanted, a request he described as beyond unusual, because as a session player, he was almost always asked to play like someone else. But the track's powerful atmosphere is enhanced by the vocals of musician Youssou N'Dour, singing in his native Senegalese. Now, I've read that there were 96 complete different versions of this song created from hundreds and hundreds of different takes on multi-track tape. The version that made it to the release was literally assembled from hundreds of 3, 6, and 12-inch pieces of 2-inch tape. Peter went on to say that they could have worked on this song for another couple of months. But this is a radically different cut, a full tapestry of joyfully complicated arrangements. It's hard to imagine that this was originally the opener on side 2, but moving it to the last track on this work was a stroke of brilliance. It leaves you with a clear understanding of just what an impressive, hauntingly beautiful, exhilaratingly engaging, fully realized album So had become. It is, in my estimation, Peter Gabriel's masterwork, his magnum opus. Now, guys, Discogs shows over 260 released versions, so there is no way I could have heard them all, okay? But I can eagerly recommend the 2002 Classic Records reissue on 200-gram vinyl. It's on QX vinyl. It's a gatefold. It's beautiful sounding. It's great pressing. Sounds marvelous, okay? And my favorite digital edition is the 2012 remaster, which is available on Qobuz as a 24-bit 96 kilohertz stream, and it sounds fabulous. So with that, I'll remind you that if you find any merit or value in the information I'm sharing here, please subscribe, like, and share links to episodes with your friends. I love hearing from you, so be sure to leave your comments and questions. And you may support the channel using Patreon, Venmo, or PayPal, or even by securing display advertising at the Audio Analyst website. And links for all these options are provided in today's description section. As always, thank you so very much for taking the time to drop by and visit today. Please be sure to stay safe and keep the music playing. Till next week, cheers.